Fantastic. Very good. Well, David Levy has been in Toastmasters since 2010 and a stage actor for much longer. Despite all that experience as an actor, it took him a while to get comfortable with public speaking. Once he did, however, he found that his time in the theater provided him with the transferable skills for public speaking. Skills that he has used in speech competitions, winning him 3 humorous speech contest titles and 3 appearances at the district level in the International Speech Contest, including 1 trip to the semis. In this presentation, Dave is going to describe his approach to incorporating body language and vocal variety when preparing a speech for delivery. Please help me welcome your new best friend and mine, the one and the only David Levy.
Thanks very much, Scott. I appreciate it. I've never been to District 11 before. I was looking forward to actually driving there today. I just found out last night that this was going to be entirely online, which is why I decided that I would share a video with you as part of this presentation, since the technology became a lot easier. In addition to what Scott said about me being a stage actor, a lot of what I've learned about body language and vocal variety has come from the Toastmasters materials, my fellow Toastmasters, both from talking shop and also just watching them in action, and good old trial and error. And by a combination of these things, acting, trial and error, Toastmasters, I have developed 2 principles, 2 acronyms, 2 tips, and 2 methodologies that help me when I think about body language and vocal variety in my presentations that I'm going to share with you all today. I'm going to start with the first principle. This is not unique to Toastmasters, but I think sometimes we need a reminder. And the principle is that excellence, I hope you will agree, takes work, right? None of us are born excellent. I know we're all born perfect, but we're not born excellent. Excellence takes work, and work takes time, right? Quite literally, if you look at the physics equations, work requires time. You can't have work without it. So excellence takes work, and work takes time. Therefore, excellence takes time. If you apply the transitive property, I promise there's very little extra math in here. Why do I bother to tell you that excellence takes time? Well, because I suspect, I don't want to accuse anybody, but I suspect that there are those among you who are like me. And like me, whenever I have a one and done speech to deliver, like for a Pathways project, I'm not going to do it again, then no matter how much lead time I give myself before that scheduled speech date, I will write or outline that speech. I will work on it and commit it to memory just in time to deliver it at the club. And it could be great. I could have good information and content. I could even be inspirational, motivational, make people laugh. But there's a very good chance that my body language and vocal variety, whatever I'm doing as part of the speech, will not be anything more than I might naturally do speaking. I was alive on this planet many more years before I was a Toastmaster than I have been since. And probably like you all, I have developed a certain vocabulary with my hands and my vocal inflections that makes up, my personal body language and vocal variety. And we could incorporate those naturally in speeches all day long. And our evaluators will probably tell us, hey, I didn't really notice anything that stood out, but it wasn't distracting. So good job with your body language and vocal variety. Well, I want us to be able to get more than distracting. And how are we going to do that? Well, if you're doing what I do and you're preparing your speeches just in time to deliver them, I would encourage you to find a way to create time. And I know that that's not so easy to do. There are, I know, among us, those immortals who are delivering speeches every week or every other week. Those people, I say, have time. And to you, I would say, if you're going to do a speech in 2 weeks, schedule it for 3 weeks. Prepare it in 2, and then take that last week to actually contemplate body language and vocal variety. And I'll explain how to do that in just a little bit. For those of us, for the rest of us, we mere mortals who don't have all that extra time to work on our speeches, I would encourage you to take a speech you've already done and repeat it. So you're not starting with the blank page. What you're starting with is a speech ready to go. And all you have to do now is think about what to add on top of that, body language and vocal variety wise. And I am so excited nowadays that Pathways actually encourages us to repeat speeches as part of some of those level 1 projects where we do a speech, we get an evaluation, we do the speech again, only we incorporate the evaluation tips. I would encourage you that even if those recommendations did not include body language and vocal variety, to think about adding it. And why am I harping on this so much? Well, as Scott was mentioning earlier, this is the place where we are free to fail so that we can go out and succeed publicly, right? So what I'm hoping to encourage you all to can do here in Toastmasters is to practice these skills so that when in the world you want to use them, you've got them in your tool chest, ready to go. You know, before you've got a spear, you've got a stick and you need to sharpen it. Before you've got a wrench, you've got metal and you need to mold it. That's where this comes in. So put in the time, whether you add time to your schedule or you are repeating a speech and inventing time that way, I encourage you to do it. All right, so what is it you're going to do? I'm going to talk about body language first. And this brings up my first acronym. I like to say that adding body language to enhance your speech is as easy as pie. And I like to say that because my acronym is PIE, P-I-E, stands for pictures, indicators, and emotions. I know we use our words a lot to create pictures in the minds of our listeners, but we could use our body to create pictures on stage or in my screen with the audience. Indicators, I'm sure we've all seen anything that is, you know, when you say, I've got one thing I want you to remember today, that's an indicator, right? When our humorous speaker yesterday, Edward Basquill, said that he took complaints from his customers, we knew he was getting a headache because he indicated so by holding his head, right? These are indicators. And if a picture is worth 1,000 words, an indicator is worth just one, or a phrase. Got a headache, running, you know, there's all the, what's this? Choking, right? We all have seen them and we could even define them in our speeches and use them to our advantage. And emotions. Before we knew anything about body language, we knew we could tell if somebody was happy or sad by their body. You can show emotions with your body and we can harness that power in our speeches. So I'd like to get a little bit deeper into the discussion on these three things: pictures, indicators, and emotions. But first, I want to show you the video of my 2012 District 40 Humorous Speech Contest winning speech. I was going to try to recreate this in person or somehow describe it, but I'm so glad that the technology of being on Zoom makes it so much easier just to share the video. It is 7 minutes long, but it's funny, I think, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And there's a lot of examples of pictures, indicators, and emotions in it that we'll then be able to talk about. As I pull it up on the screen, I want to tell you what the first thing that I say in it is, because just in case there is some sort of sound issue and the video starts right on the speech, I want to be able to tell you what it is that you're hearing. Can I get an audible confirmation from somebody that you can see my screen where the speech is up? A thumbs up from Scott will also help.
We can see it.
Great, thank you. I say a haiku because I'm about to deliver a haiku poem, which you may remember from school was a 3-line poem that starts with, the first line is 5 syllables, the second is 7 syllables, and the third line is 5 syllables again. And then I recite that poem. I don't actually define a haiku for my audience in the contest, taking a risk that they knew what a haiku was, but I just wanted you to hear it in case there's a sound issue at the very beginning. And here goes the speech. It was called Recalculating.
A haiku. Turning left, then right. My dad's GPS struggles. Recalculating. An odd haiku, to be sure. But then it's odd the places one's mind will go when you're trapped in the back seat of a car for 90 minutes. Fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, and anyone who's ever had too much time on your hands, that recently happened to me. I was trapped in the back seat of my parents' car. And during my captivity, I wrote that humorous haiku. I developed an incredible invention. And I had a very interesting insight. You see, it was my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And to help celebrate, they invited me out to New York to spend a week on the town with them. Broadway shows, fine dining, Times Square was a great trip. My parents were exceedingly generous. In fact, I'd say that the trip was perfect. If it wasn't for this one little thing. You have to understand that my parents practically grew up in Manhattan. They know the streets of New York as well as any cab driver driving today. My father certainly drives a lot like a New York City cab driver, which despite earlier comparisons to Roman cab drivers is still pretty bad. But that is not to say that he is not prone to making a wrong turn once in a while. Which is why wherever they go, no matter how far the distance, my parents always start by plugging in their Garmin GPS system, which I applaud. But what then drives me nuts is they will argue with every piece of advice the Garmin gives them. And I don't use the word advice by accident. The Garmin might say, turn right. But it might as well say, I recommend you turn right, but if you have any other ideas at all, go for it. Because that's how my parents hear it. For example, in 500 feet, turn left onto Broadway. My mother, oh Al, Broadway's going to be so crowded this time of day. Go 2 more blocks up to 7th. Recalculating. Or the Garmin might say, enter the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. My father this time, I hate driving on the BQE. I'm going on up to the Cross Island Expressway. Recalculating. And even when there's only one way to go, they'll still find a way to disagree with the Garmin. Cross the Manhattan Bridge. Oh, Al, that's ridiculous. Drive down that embankment and submarine your way across the Hudson. Recalculating. So I hope you can appreciate why, after 90 minutes of this, driving from the center of Long Island, where my parents live, to the center of Manhattan, that I would refer to myself as trapped in the back seat of that car? Turn right. No, recalculating. Turn left. No, recalculating. Turn around, you're going the wrong way. Never, recalculating. And me all the while in the back seat. Oh. Well, when I finally got tired of rolling my eyes at my parents, I let my mind wander a little bit, and that's when I came up with my humorous haiku. And, proud of myself, I decided to share my haiku with my parents. But it turns out humor is really in the mind of the beholder. So I returned to my vinyl and velour prison, and that's when I came up with my incredible invention. Now hear me out. What if, instead of a GPS, a global positioning satellite, we could develop an LPS, a life positioning satellite? So whenever we made a wrong turn in life, it would just say, recalculating, and set us back on our course. I certainly could have used one of these last week. My girlfriend had invited me over for dinner. I was late and I didn't call, and when I got there, I said, I thought dinner was going to be ready. I know, believe me. I was there. I got the look. You know the look. You don't want the look. Well, that whole mess took a lot longer to clean up than if I had had an LPS on my head. Imagine it this way. I thought dinner was going to be ready. Recalculating, drive 1.5 miles to the forest and don't come back without roses. Hey, honey, I brought you some roses. Is there anything that I could do to help with dinner? You have arrived at your final destination. I mean, wouldn't you buy one? I couldn't wait to tell this idea to my parents. I was going to be a gazillionaire. But at that particular moment, there was a three-way standoff going on in the front seat. My mother was insisting my father take the next exit. My father had ideas of his own, and the Garmin, having given up altogether, was now speaking only in Mandarin. I figured it would keep, so I let my mind wander some more, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that an LPS, however great an idea, technologically, impossible. But that's when I had my interesting insight. And it occurred to me that we, All of us have an LPS. But the satellites which orbit around our life are not up in space. They're down here on Earth with us. They're our bosses, our coaches, our teachers, our mentors, our parents. Right there in the front seat were the very people who taught me right from wrong. My father taught me how to drive safely, even if sometimes my driving is likened to that of a New York City cab driver. My mother taught me never to leave the house with dirty underwear and always make sure my hair looked nice. Well, at least I have on clean underwear. But the point is that the more I thought about it, the less I wanted to roll my eyes at my parents, and the more like them I realized I was. I witnessed countless examples of them ignoring the advice of their GPS, and truth be told, I've often ignored the advice of my LPS. But sometimes, when my life would get way off course, I would take whatever advice my LPS had for me, and I would follow it to a T. A lot like on this trip, when our car got way off course, my parents finally had to admit that the GPS might know a thing or two about directions, and followed his advice all the way to the hotel. So as we were finally pulling in, 90 minutes after we started what should have been a 60-minute trip, I had one final bit of inspiration. And that is that in life, not unlike this particular car trip, we could make many wrong turns and still end up where we're going. It just takes a little recalculating.
Thank you. The speech, again, I wanted to show because there are a lot of examples in it of, oops, the next video started automatically. A lot of examples of pictures, indicators, and emotions in it. And it would be great to be able to just talk to them rather than have to describe them to you, in which a lot of the humor would have been lost in translation, I'm sure. For pictures, you know, when I think about pictures, I think about nouns. I think about people, places, and things. In this speech, we had my car. Now, it wasn't very detailed, but you don't need a lot of detail to create a picture for people on stage. You know, you could use 3 lines to draw a triangle, but you could also suggest that very same triangle with 3 dots at the vertices, right? My car was suggested merely by this chair, which I described as the back seat, and I would occasionally gesture to the right and left in front of me to demonstrate the passenger seat where my mother was sitting and the driver's seat where my father was sitting. I would even stand in those spots, not sit, because how many chairs am I going to have on stage, when I was in the role of my parents, each of which had their own sort of body language. My dad was driving sort of angry. My mom was waving her arms a lot. And the Garmin was another person in this speech, was personified. And every time the Garmin GPS system spoke, until the Garmin broke down and lost its cool, it was back straight, hands clasped in front, speaking formally. So it had its own sort of characterization that you could see as in my body language. And in fact, there was a while there where I was switching in and out of being narrator and acting as the Garmin. And to do so, I would step forward and talk as myself, and then step back and be the Garmin, and then step forward again and be myself. And just by making these little adjustments and using my body, I was able to step in and out of these people that I was portraying, myself and the Garmin, and you would know which was which when I was doing it, because I was being very careful to treat each one the same and be consistent about it. So creating a picture on stage like the car, what I mean by picture is every time I then talked about the car or my parents, I could gesture over to there. This 2-camera system they used to film this particular speech made it a little difficult to keep up, but if you could see the whole stage at once, you would have seen me gesturing and you'd know that that's the car. And every time I point over there, I'm talking about my parents or the car. And because I had created that spot on the stage where there was this picture, again, you don't know what kind of car, you don't know if it's 4-door, 2-door, you don't know if it's a pickup truck even. I'm just talking about this car, and you could create your own car in your head as a listener. And it's maybe a good idea that I didn't give it too much detail, because then you could imagine your own family car. But just having this, some people use the word hologram there on stage that served as that picture, was useful for me as to deliver the message of the speech. Place could, now I don't have a lot of places that I talked about in this particular speech, but if you imagine telling somebody a story about walking into a cave and I could not believe how high the ceilings were, you know, you create a picture by looking up as you're saying those words. Your actions complement your words, and by looking high and saying those ceilings were really high, your listeners believe you because they see you looking up really high. That would be a place. And the things, I guess I had the GPS and, well, anyway, you could imagine it all. People's, places, and things. Pictures. Indicators are the things that we have used a lot in charades, right? Got one syllable, sounds like it's a movie, you know, all these things that we do. When we go to a restaurant, we ask the waiter from across the room, when you want the check, you go check. For those ex-smokers or smokers amongst you, you may recognize this one, which says, do you have an ashtray? But we use indicators in our speeches all the time. I pointed out one that Edward used in his speech last night. Graham Honaker used one in his speech when he said, I had a vision. And just by doing this, we know that this means a focused vision. This complements what he's saying. We talk with our hands a lot, and lots of times, like I'm doing right now, they don't really mean anything, but this meant something. This was focused vision. Anything over here and over here is outside my vision. This is what I'm looking at. And when he's talking about his vision of the perfect family vacation, perfect, as it turns out, family vacation. Indicators are a lot of fun to use, but they're not so easy to know when you could implement one. You know, a picture, if you're ever describing something to somebody in your speech, you could say, well, this may be a good place to think about how I could demonstrate a picture. But indicators is not so much. That's where a little bit of that effort, spending that time thinking about what can I do to enhance the speech using an indicator comes into play. And I got to tell you, one of my favorite ones from last night, Sherry Hampton Farmer, talking about the power of words. Words matter, she said. Words can give you confidence and power, she said, making fists with each hand, fists which we know demonstrate strength. And then she said they could also have the power to debilitate. Now, if I was to ask you what was the hand gesture that represents debilitation, you would have a hard time thinking about it. But in her speech, debilitate was the opposite of power and confidence. And so going from this to the release of those fists was the perfect gesture. And I know she put some time into coming up with that. That did not just come out naturally. So these are ways that you could use to find indicators to use in your speech. Then there's emotion, right? We saw a lot of emotion in that speech I just delivered. There was my father, I don't want to drive on that particular road. My mother, that's ridiculous. The Garmin getting increasingly frustrated at my parents, and me in the backseat rolling around. This is clearly the types of body language that you're going to use in your speeches have to kind of match the event, right? I'm doing a humorous speech. I can get away with some really over the top demonstrative actions, but you can't always do that, right? If you're giving a speech about the quarterly numbers, you know, you're not going to roll around on the ground to demonstrate, you know, that the numbers were like a fish out of water. You know, you might do that in a humorous speech, but you're not going to do that at your quarterly review session. So you really got to make sure you know your audience too. But pictures, indicators, and emotions are your 3 letters that I use to think about whenever I think about adding body language. And emotions are easy because you know that if you're ever describing a moment where you're suggesting anger or happiness or sadness, you could do something with your shoulders. Your shoulders could drop, your eyebrows could go up, facial expressions are really important. Or if you're happy and excited, your eyes open up, your body starts to get energetic, right? So our shoulders and our face and our hands and our sort of like speed of our movement, these are all things we can use to suggest whatever emotion it is we're talking about at a particular time. And when our body matches our words, then there's credibility. If your body doesn't match your words, it might lend to humor. It might be good to suggest sarcasm. Oh, I loved that trip. shaking my head when my words are saying something positive, my head is saying something negative. You can use it to humor, but for the most part, in general, we're using it to complement what it is we're saying. Now, I want to give you a tip as far as body language goes. When you are going on to, this is my first of my 2 tips today, when you're going on to stage or you're about to do something in which you're relying on your body to help convey the message of your presentation, stretch. If you're going to use your arms, if you know you have a gesture that's touchdown, then do some stretching ahead of time. Really stretch those areas of your body you're going to be relying upon in your speech. In high school, in theater, we never started rehearsing until we warmed up, and we warmed up our bodies with a series of stretches. It might take 20 minutes. I can't believe that the teacher allocated 20 minutes of rehearsal time to just warming up every time, but he did. And it was to our benefit, because when we needed our bodies to do what we wanted them to do on stage, we were loose and we were ready. And there are exercises you could do, not just to stretch up to the sky and stretch your arms, but you can isolate your neck and stretch it in different ways. Even, isolate it. You could isolate your rib cage and stretch it around. You could isolate your hips, and you could do things with your legs as well. We all had to do that in gym class probably, and not my favorite class in school, but stretching is highly recommended then for any time that you're going to be relying on your body to help you convey your message. That's the body language. Now we're moving into vocal variety, and my second acronym. If incorporating body language into your speech is as easy as pie, then I like to say that incorporating vocal variety to enhance your speech is a piece of cake, because my next acronym is CAKE, C-A-K-E, stands for, and I'll use these words several times, so if you don't get them on my first time I say them, don't worry about it. Stands for clarity, audibility, cadence. Okay, so I know that doesn't begin with a K, but I'm taking liberties with that one. And emotion. Yes, the same E as we had in pie. Clarity, audibility, cadence, and emotion. Clarity and audibility, you might think of these as diction and volume, right? In this age of virtual presentations, I don't have to worry about my volume too much. My microphone is doing that for me. If I'm in a contest and I've got a microphone on, then I have sort of an advantage, but lots of times, especially in the early levels of the contest, if you're in those, you don't have a microphone. In our clubs, we don't have a microphone. Depending on how crowded the room is and how many bodies are absorbing that sound, you really need to make sure you are heard in the back row. And of course, if you do not enunciate the important words of your speech, you're not going to be understood. I had an acting mentor who told me once, and I'm going to clean it up just a tiny bit for you. He said, David, you could be the best actor in the world, but if the audience can't hear you, you stink. He didn't say stink. So, and I would say to all of us that you can have the most impactful message in the world, the most important message in the world, but if the audience can't hear you, if they can't understand you, then why are you bothering with the message, right? So we want to make sure that the audience can understand, and we do that by making sure that we are using diction and we are using volume. We are projecting our voice, pushing with our abdomen to get the air out of our body, using our volume to make sure that the people in the back row can hear us. The interesting thing I found about diction is that so I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm talking about native English speakers to native English speakers right now, but this could be native Spanish speakers to native Spanish speakers. If you're communicating to people in the language that they're familiar with, using the same language, then you can get away with a lot, right? Because we can understand a lot of slurred words that people may use by the context in which they're said. So I could tell you I was out all night last night, but I didn't say out all night last night. I said out all night. Right? Out all was like one word, but you knew I meant out all because you're familiar enough with the language, you hear the context, you've heard the phrase out all night before, and I could get away with that. But if I'm about to introduce a word that you're not familiar with, imagine in writing, it would be capitalized words, quoted words, italicized words, maybe bold words. These words may be ones that you're not going to get from context if I'm not careful to enunciate them well. I don't know if you had a chance to watch Linda Marie Miller last night. She was marvelous. But, you know, when where did I wrote down somewhere the word she used? She mentioned her grandfather, Joseph E. Meyer. Now, she knew we had not heard of her grandfather before. So to make sure we understood what she was saying, she said it clearly, Joseph E. Meyer. She later mentioned Hammond Times, the newspaper, and Calumet Bank. And every time she said one of these things, she made sure to say it clearly because she knew she was introducing us to something that we were probably not familiar with. Marty Rowan did this last night in her humorous speech when she said that her grandmother wanted her to be named Ethel Arnold Sprigg. You know, she really made sure to enunciate it because nobody's heard that name before, and she would tell you, thankfully, right? So to enunciate, you have to keep in mind what it is the audience is not aware of. A 50-cent word, you know, a word that is just not in common practice. When I mentioned the LPS in my humorous speech that you watched a moment ago, I knew that if I just said LPS, it might sound like a word, or I wanted it to make sure people understood it was an acronym that contrasted with GPS. And so I was being careful to enunciate LPS the first time that I said it. You just have to imagine what it is the audience may not understand. And if you can't do that, this is kind of part of one of my tips later, but you know, record yourself, because you're going to be your worst critic. And somebody may forget to tell you that they didn't understand this word or that. But if it's important to you that this speech be clear and audible, because maybe you're going to do it again later, you're going to want to know where the hiccups are. So if you could listen to it as an audience member, maybe 2 days after you've delivered it, this will give you an indication of like, oh, I didn't understand that. I really better make sure to enunciate there, because you don't have to enunciate every word. We can get away with a lot, but it is important in a lot of places. Clarity and audibility. Now the K for cadence. Okay, I couldn't come up with a real K word, but I do love talking about cadence. This is what Toastmasters teaches as pace, pitch, pause. We all have our natural cadences that we use when we speak. Sometimes we talk in an aside, sometimes we come in hot. We have a way to talk that we almost can't hide. I mean, if I believe what I watch on television drama, you could disguise your voice on the phone, but your cadence is like a fingerprint that the FBI can use to track you down. So I don't know if that's real or not, but this always has me thinking. I like to sound natural when I'm speaking. I like when I'm listening to people who sound natural. If you ever saw Ferris Bueller's Day Off, there was that one teacher who spoke in a monotone voice, and he did so to exaggerated effect because we wanted to, they wanted to indicate just how boring this guy was. And if you sort of like just memorize your speech word for word, there's a very good chance you're going to recite it as you're remembering each word, and you're going to lose that variety that makes up your natural cadence. I just implore you to try to find a way to capture that naturalness that you are imbued with. That's what makes each of us different, is our personal cadences. And I think it just, well, I just can't stress it enough. I think it's a really important factor. You know, so Linda Marie Miller, again, she told these great 3 stories in her speech last night in her presentation. The first one was this hilarious one about having to deliver a presentation in her business school, right? And she talked about how nervous she was, and she was late, and she ran there, and they called her name, and and in her mind she's panicking, and then she started to deliver her speech, and she was frozen with fear. She had this difference in her cadence based on whether we were sort of inside her head with her, feeling the panic she was feeling, or we were outside as one of her students, witnessing her frozen self, unable to deliver that presentation effectively. This is an example of varying the cadence to make sure that we know that it goes with the story. We knew when we were inside her head, and we knew when we were outside her head, based on whether she was talking in that panicking frenetic mode, or she was speaking in that very serious deer in the headlights mode that she got into. Really excellent use of cadence there. The reason why I harp on it, I suppose, is because as an actor, when we memorize lines, we rehearse those lines over and over again. in the speech that I'm delivering today, this is not word for word the way I practiced it, not by a long shot. But in a play, you kind of are obligated. You bought the rights to the play, and one of those conditions are you're going to deliver the play as the playwright envisioned it, and that includes saying their lines. Right, so you are required to say the words exactly as they're written. So these aren't even like the words you would choose, and it may be difficult to find a way to say them that sounds the way you would say them if you could change the language. I have practiced theater, acting to the extent that I sort of pride myself on being able to make it sound like I'm saying these words for the first time. Because as an actor, when you see the show, I've said them hundreds of times, but as an audience member, that character on stage is saying them for the first time. And they don't even know what they're going to say until the other person says what they're going to say before them, because they haven't formulated a response until they hear what they're saying first. And just through this practice, I have been able to, even in the speeches that I do have memorized word for word, able to make it sound a little bit more natural by just remembering pauses, pitches, personalities, right? Pace, changing the pace. These are the P's, remember that I mentioned Toastmasters, to try and make sure that my cadence is not lost in the delivery of my speech. And finally, emotion. And it is not an accident that this is the same word that the E stood for in body language with pi. Emotion is as much in the voice as it is in the body. And in fact, I would say that you could have emotion in your voice with a neutral body more than you could have emotion in your body with a neutral voice, right? It just doesn't sort of work. Like, how can I be so, my body is so jazzed up, but my voice is just normal? Like, how is that possible? You can use emotion to great effect, right? To demonstrate the, what it is you're trying to convey. Again, going back to, it was Edward's speech. He talked about visiting this customer's house who he had to tell her she had a hot water heater in her basement. And then she became suspicious. She said to him, "How do you know I had a hot water heater? Like, have you been in my house before?" But he was doing it in third person narrative, but he was still delivering it with that same sort of suspicious tone that his customer had. And it was really great to sort of amplify that moment. We understood the position he was in because of the way he delivered that narrative to us. It was really nice. You could see in a few instances in my speech recalculating when I talk as the Garmin, even when there's a he because I'm a he, and that was the Garmin, and I'm the Garmin. So when the Garmin said recalculating the first time, was a little irritated because my mother said take 7th instead of Broadway. And then it was a little bit more irritated the second time because my dad wanted to take one highway instead of the other. And finally, it was really irritated to the point of frustration when they decided not to take the bridge, but to submarine away there across the river. This is just a way of adding that inflection into your voice. You don't have to say, "I'm irritated." You don't have to say, "I'm frustrated." You can convey it with your voice and using that language. Now, like I had a tip that you should exercise your body before you go on stage and use your body, I also recommend you exercise your voice. There are definitely things you could do. We did all these in part of our warm-ups and rehearsals in high school too. And I do them before I go up on stage to do a play, and I do them before I was doing them in my car earlier when I had to take my dog to the groomer. And they're very simple and anybody could do these. Tongue twisters are great for enunciation, to get your diction in order. You can find your favorite one online. She sells seashells by the seashore. Start slow, do it till you get it right, and then start to speed it up a little bit and speed it up a little bit to the point where you can do it fast. You've got that kind of control over those tongue twisting words, and you're ready to deliver your speech. One of the ones I like to do, I call me, may, well, I think we called it in school too, me, may, ma, mo, moo. And the way you do it is you sort of sing, and I'm not a singer, but anyway, you sort of sing those words and exercise your mouth as you open wide, as you say each syllable. Me, may, ma, mo, moo. And you do that repeatedly, even increasing in pitch. Me, may, ma, mo, moo. And this gets your vocal cords warm. Me, may, ma, mo, moo, and it stretches out your face, because believe it or not, if your face is tight, then you may end up speaking like this for most of your speech. But if you could stretch out, your face before you speak, then you will have the liberty of open mouth vocalization and be able to get the message out that you're there to deliver. And another one that I like to do too, and this was, I never would have, nobody's ever said this except in high school, it's a breathing exercise. And this is a great one, I think, because I talked about earlier how, especially when you're in an in-person situation and you want to reach the back of the room, you need to, people call it breathing from your diaphragm. I don't even know what that means really, but I do know that if your diaphragm is like a fireplace bellows, right? You're using that muscle in your lower stomach to force the air up and out of your lungs so that the words travel on it to the back of the room. And to do that, you need strong breath. And one way you could get that is with this exercise. You start by breathing in for 2 through your nose. 2, when I say 2, I mean 2 seconds, and then out through your mouth. And you do that a couple of times. And then you breathe in for the same 2, but now out for 4 seconds. You do 2 and 6, and eventually 2 and 8. And here's where the value of that comes in. If you can get the breath that you need in a short period of time and use that breath for a long period of time, then you will undoubtedly find a natural point in those, say, 8 seconds to find your next natural breath, right? It's very useful for being able to expend extra breath energy to push your voice to the back of the room, because you've got at least 8 seconds of pushing in you that you've gotten from just a quick intake of air. Now, we probably don't breathe in for 2 seconds every time we breathe in, but a quick intake of air, and you've just sort of exercised this, you put it into your muscle memory of being able to use that air for several seconds and get that message to the back of the room. These are just some of the many vocal exercises you could do to help you be understood while you're delivering your speech. Highly recommend you find your favorites, maybe Google some more, and use them to your advantage. So now you've got your ideas for body language you're going to put in your speech. You've got your ideas for the vocal variety. What are you going to do with it? Well, this is my first piece of the methodology, and this was alluded to by Scott earlier. It was alluded to by Lisa Marie last night. You got to practice it. You got to practice it in your club. Remember, Toastmasters is a learning laboratory where we are free to fail. So go ahead and find some opportunities for body language and vocal variety in your very next speech. And don't worry if it's not even entirely appropriate. Just practice the techniques, because one day you're going to want it and you're going to want to have practiced them. And when that day comes, you'll feel much more confident when you have practiced them in your speeches. So this methodology is live in-person practicing. You can practice for your family. It doesn't have to be for Toastmasters. You could practice for a friend. You could practice for yourself. I do encourage, as I mentioned earlier, recording and listening back, because I promise you, you don't sound or look the way you think you do. It does help to get that biofeedback. Sort of another principle that I kind of go by, and it's important when you go into your club to practice this, excuse me, that you give it your all, that you do not hold back. It is going to feel awkward at first. That's okay. But if you go in, and you saw in that speech, right, that where I'm rolling around on that chair in frustration of my parents, that was not in the speech at the club level. In fact, I didn't even have a chair and a car at the club level. One of my club members said to me, David, I like your speech, it's very funny, but I think you should have a car. You could bring out a chair and you could really demonstrate how frustrated you are by physically doing it in the chair. And I remember thinking that I thought this guy was right, but I also felt very uncomfortable doing it. I had never done anything like that before. I was nervous. I knew that I had time before my area level of this contest so that I could practice it and see if it worked. And so I figured I would try it in the club. It's supposed to be a safe space after all, and it is, and it was for me. And I remember thinking, though, right before I went on, that this could be embarrassing, but if I don't give it 100%, then if it doesn't work, I'm not going to know if it didn't work because it doesn't work or because I didn't give it 100%. I'm not going to learn anything by not just going out and giving it. So my second principle is you got to go for it. You know, just don't hold back. This is, again, Scott said earlier, the place where we're free to fail so we can succeed publicly. Thanks for that too, Scott. I'm glad to find something I can use right before the speech. And then finally, my last methodology is whether or not you have an opportunity to do this for people before you do the final presentation, one of the ways that you can possibly, this may not work for everybody, but it has worked for me. I didn't use it on this speech, but I used it on the later speech to great success for me. Imagine the speech being delivered by somebody you admire as a speaker. I literally laid on my couch once and imagined somebody else delivering my speech on stage, and I watched how they effortlessly did things on stage that I dreamed of doing. And then I copied what they did. And it did very well for me. This was the speech that took me to the semifinals that one year. I was in an amusement park with my son for part of the speech, and I was talking about the rides, and I had a lot of sweeping motions and sort of like scary being hung from the sky kind of things. And I just literally visualized somebody better than me doing the speech on stage, and then I copied what they did. And again, I had to go in and be bold about it, because the first time I ever did that was at the division level of the contest. The day before I did the visualization, I added all this body language, and I beat a highly lauded district competitor in our district that day, because I think because, you know, I had that added edge of having this just sort of no holds barred kind of go for it body language and vocal variety in the speech. And so today I have described for you two methodologies: practice and visualization, two acronyms. I've given you pie and cake. I've given you two tips: warm up your body, warm up your voice. And I think I had two principles: just go for it. You've got to put in 100%, and also find the time, whether you add new time that you didn't have before, or just repeat a speech and you kind of start from without having to start from scratch. Find the time to add into thinking about how to add body language and vocal varieties to your presentations. And when you do, I'm sure you will discover that your presentations will be enhanced and you will benefit from having practiced these techniques. I'm happy to have question and answer if anybody would like to have any questions they've got.
So first, as a district, give it up for David. What a fantastic job. Hysterical speech. Obvious why you won your speech competition. Absolutely fantastic humorous speech, and absolutely wonderful advice today. So if you want to raise your hand, we will call on you to ask questions, or if you just want to type them in the chat, I will monitor the chat and answer some questions there. So as people are thinking of their questions, David, I have one for you.
Please.
When are gestures too much? How do you manage the going between the appropriate gestures and being a caricature of the character you're trying to create?
That's a great question. I'm sure that there is not a definitive line in the sand that you could draw that would be 1 pixel thick, you know, like here's not enough and here's too much. But this is where I think recording comes in. One of the things that was been recommended to me before, and I have done this, is if you can videotape yourself delivering a speech in practice and then watch that back without the volume on. You know, again, I talk about us being our own worst critics. You will find yourself like, I can't believe I stood there the whole time with the pterodactyl arms, right? You've heard about those, or that I do this all the time throughout the entire speech. Why am I doing this? That doesn't even mean anything. You will start to see your habits. Excellent, Jasmine, please do. The habits that you have that are like verbal crutches. And like our verbal crutches, some are okay, but we should really work on limiting them. So I recommend videotaping yourself and watching yourself back, because you're not always going to get your club members to point those things out to you. They might notice it and they might be able to share that with you, but they may not. Again, we're going to be our worst critics.
Absolutely. So Robert Dean just said, it's not really a question, but a great statement. You put in the time, capturing examples from contestants and prior speaker makes for an exceptional connection with your audience. It gave freshness to your speech. So well done. And I noticed that conversation going back and forth as you were going throughout your presentation. So absolutely wonderful use of rhetorical devices to call back to something that's very fresh in our minds, So thank you for that. Very well done.
Thank you to Linda Marie and the contestants from the contest last night for providing several great examples, and you this morning even, that I could use to include.
All right, so who besides me has questions? Because I have another one if nobody else has any other questions out there. Oh, somebody is chatting. So, here we go. Yes, Parrot, we do record these. You will be able to watch this. So yes. So I have one other question for you, or I guess question, comment, statement, somewhere in there. I've seen a club recently that instituted, kind of like we have a grammarian within our clubs, that instituted a gesturian. It hasn't been named yet, but it's like a gesture of the day watcher. So it's somebody that gives feedback just on the gestures and body language instead of on like the word of the day. How was the language? Have you seen that used anywhere? Is that something that?
No, but I love it. I love, that's a great idea. I'm writing it down. A gesturian.
There's no name for it. I've heard it. Somebody called it a chief gesticulation officer, gesturian, a gesture master.
I love it.
They were clearly trying to come up with a title, but the concept seems like what you're talking about.
Yeah. In this world of virtual presentations, like you saw it in the speeches last night, the humorous speech contest, it's not as easy to create holograms in our little window that we have here, even if we're standing up and are back from the camera. But gestures and indicators end up taking over. I wanted to mention one, by the way, that I just loved so much. It was Randy. He talked about living in a holler that had one holler to the right and one holler to the left and one holler in front and one holler behind. Later, he went on when he said that his grandmother needed to teach everybody when Granny had to teach everybody how to make toast. He talked about teaching everybody in all the other hollers, and he just did this thing where he pointed in 4 different directions really quickly. And then he said, she teach Jenny and Jeb and Joe and Josephine, and we knew, one and one lived in each one of the hollers. You could do that sort of thing here in this small space. I'd have a difficult time creating the car and having it be distinct from where I'm sitting right now, for example. But you could do a lot of stuff with your gestures that are a lot of fun and people can see, because even a small hand gesture can be seen because you're right there. You're not in the back of the room. And we have an advantage here. And I just love that idea.
I love it. The holler reminded me, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, just outside of West Virginia, and I grew up in a holler. I grew up in Sunnyside Holler. So when he was doing that with the directions, I could picture my grandmother who talked the same way when she talked about her sisters and who talked about where her brother lived, and everybody lived in a different holler. And I was like, oh, I'm like at home.
That's great.
It's kind of funny.
Very good.
Anybody have any other questions here for David this morning? I don't see any hands raised or anything in chat. David, once again, from District 11, thank you so very much for your time this morning. We're so glad we caught you before you left from Cincinnati to come here. As you were talking about that, I'm like, no, please, no, don't come. But thank you so much for coming virtually for today. An absolutely incredible session. This was recorded. We will post it on the District 11 website. We have a private page that you have to be a member of District 11 in order to get to. theoretically. It's just a private page on YouTube. Check it out there, and it's available through the District 11 website. So for everybody else, we just got pie, we just got cake, and now we have time to eat it too. It is noontime. It is time to break for lunch. I encourage you to all go get refreshed, go get something to drink, go walk around, go do some stretches, maybe some breathing exercises. Whatever it is you want to do today, get up out of your chairs, go walk a little bit, come back for 1 o'clock. Mark has said that he is going to come back because he very much wants to introduce Lori at 1 o'clock. So we will see you all back here in 1 hour and 5 minutes. We'll open the room about 1:45. So we will see you back here in an hour. David, again, thank you so very, very much. Everybody else, enjoy your lunch, enjoy your time, and we look forward to seeing you in an hour for our next presentation. Until